So that statement that John just read was an attempt by a contemporary professor of Unitarian Universalist history to observe what we generally believe. It was given not long after an immense study of Unitarian Universalism was undertaken concerning our theological diversity, which corroborated the good doctor's summation. Now, in my experience with UUs across this country, I think that he captured our worldview fairly well. And actually, John Fleming, could you turn down the air a little bit? I'm noticing a lot of fans here. So could you turn down the AC, please? Colder. Make it colder. Down in temperature, up in power. Right. At any rate, so now when somebody asks you what UUs believe, you don't have to stutter and flail. You can simply commit Dr. Bumbaugh's speech to memory. All right, maybe that is too much. But you can refer to the principles, especially, I would submit, the first and last. You know them? First principle. Last principle. Okay. So that works, I think. But there's also another answer that is even simpler and corresponds, in fact, with those first two options. You can tell your inquisitor that we are, generally speaking, religious naturalists. Now, it's true that given the chance to identify themselves as such, there is a natural reluctance among Unitarian Universalists to identify it as anything. But from a deductive school of walks like a duck, talks like a duck, we are, by and large, religious naturalists. Indeed, former president of our Meadville Lombard Seminary, William Murray, has observed that religious naturalism has become the basic theological perspective of Unitarian Universalism. So after we discuss what it is, if you find that you are not a religious naturalist, but are still comfortable amongst many of them, don't sweat it. The truth is that almost all of us are going to agree on this on a sliding scale anyway. Some feeling a magnetic affinity with the idea, and some less so. So what is religious naturalism? It is a philosophy, a theology, a way of life that finds its meaning in the processes of nature in all its immensity, all of its delicacy, all of its freedom, and all of its fate. It can be atheist or theist, but it does make a distinction between the natural and the supernatural, honoring the former and by and large dismissing the latter. Religious naturalism has a long history in Unitarian circles. It wasn't always known as religious naturalism, but the basic tenets were a key component of the philosophy of the Emersonian brand of Transcendentalists. It entirely affirms the inherent worth of every person and the interconnectedness of all existence. Rooted in the scientific method, religious naturalism also understands that spirituality, reverence, and myth are essential to its vibrancy. And I will touch on each of these, starting with reverence, for it is through reverence of nature that we are able to transcend our sense of self and enter into the spiritual. It starts with awe. Remember awe? It flips the hive switch, right? By the way, if you are not in awe of all that you see, I would submit that you are not paying very close attention. From awe, religious naturalism returns to intentional, sometimes ritualized reverence of nature. From there is no choice but to treat every person, every being, including yourself, with respect, recognizing an inherent galactic dignity. From awe to reverence to dignity and back again. Like all religions, religious naturalism has a central myth. The myth supporting religious naturalism is evolution, or as some call it, the big story. Now keep in mind that myth-making does not discount the facts behind the story. It just makes them more symbolic, poetic, personal, and human. And you might understand that evolution is as mind-blowingly bizarre as any myth that any tradition can offer. To wit, life emerged from non-life. Consciousness emerged from specific complexity. And it's all from the same basic ingredients. The same stuff that makes the stars makes consciousness. It has been said that we are the universe becoming conscious of itself. And we are increasingly responsible for the next phase of evolution on this planet. And perhaps for the next page in the book of life itself. What are we going to do about that? Awe, reverence, and dignity. It's funny though, we have amazing power, unprecedented in the known history of being. And yet, from the perspective of the universe, we are practically bugs. I don't mean that as a measurement of mass or scale. I mean that materially, mathematically, genetically, we have an inordinate amount in common with a beetle. And spiritually, there is no difference in the quality of the life force that animates the bug and the quality of the life force that animates us. So on the one hand, we are practically gods, and on the other, we are practically locusts. It's enough to make your head spin. It's enough to make you want to put on some Pink Floyd albums. Go stare at your rosemary bush for 45 minutes. And you should. That's exactly what you should do. Because reverence is the key. Awe, reverence, dignity. And your head is spinning the dark side of the moon because you're a god and you're a bug, you're everything and you're nothing. And that is either confusing or it is the most basic thing, the fundamental character of the universe. It is the most fundamental character of the universe because the fundamental character of the universe is balance. It's right there in the beginning. The Big Bang. And so here we are going to do some myth making. Big Bang, expansion, but gravity. Both were there as two primary forces at the birth and perpetuation of the universe. So there is balance in the very seed of being. And yet being is never at exact equilibrium. Thomas Berry, theologian and naturalist, calls it balanced imbalance and creative turbulence. Balanced imbalance is the fundamental character of the universe, fundamental character of God, the fundamental character of a bug and of you, so too of life, matter, and motion. So gravity limits expansion, and expansion limits gravity. And yet even within this primordial constraint, there is somehow still the infinite. We'll touch on that paradox in a moment. So all this Genesis is happening and the universe unconsciously. But we humans are conscious. As it was said, we are the universe becoming conscious. And so we are the universe capable of making a choice. Or as we have observed, more precisely, we are the universe capable of telling a story, and thereby capable of shaping some of the limits. And if we don't tell the right story, if we don't make a choice consciously, our unconsciousness, that is the rest of being, will enforce limits without regard to us. In other words, if humans don't want to get limited in a very uncomfortable way, we must be self-limiting. Self-limitation engenders harmony. And so now we can talk practices, and we can call them religious practices. Because by self-limiting, we are engaging in practices. And they are religious practices because they make us pause and consider, and if we do them with awareness, they orient us to our common best interests, which is to live in balanced imbalance with each other and the world. Remember that balance is the fundamental character of the universe, and in practices that acknowledge limits and so aim for balance, there is a reflection and incarnation and reincarnation of the creation of the universe and the perpetuation of being and life. In a sense, by self-limiting, we step on the path of self-transcendence, because self-limitation orients us to something greater, or at least other than ourselves, something beyond ego. And that orientation is the essence of a spiritual life and a life of meaning. Transcending self and the ability to welcome all things, like we talked about last week. These are dancing partners. They aid and abet one another and entwine to the same tune. As we saw last week, it is in welcoming all things where freedom and fulfillment can be experienced. So we increase our ability to welcome all things and experience possibly freedom and fulfillment through conscious self-limitation. This intuition has long been with us. We see it in the Sabbath laws of Judaism, the 5 times daily prayers of Islam, the posture of the meditating Buddhist. All of these impose structure that orients their practitioners to an ultimate concern. And we may develop our own such practices. Of course, we must guard against dogma and having limits for the sake of tradition. Our practices must orient us to the awe of nature through religious observance and embody its wonder and acknowledge our place in it. And this could be as easy as sitting down and stopping your day at a particular time to engage all your senses fully wherever you find yourself. It can be that simple. The limit can be stopping. Or perhaps you may want to limit what you eat. This can serve multiple functions. The beef industry is responsible for more greenhouse gas than all the cars on the planet. And this makes no mention of how they treat their livestock, their animals. And so maybe you give up eating cows. Or maybe you don't drive one day a week. Or maybe you stop drinking chocolate milk because you love chocolate milk. And every time you have to turn it down, you have to ask yourself, why am I turning down this chocolate milk? And then you remember, you are turning it down because the act is supposed to remind you about how you are an amazing part of this self-limited universe, and that you ought to honor with health the creation that you are. And it also reminds you that humans have a special responsibility and opportunity to live in harmony with a universe that was limited from its inception, where everything you see, all the cars, carpets, and windows, and people, and plants, and animals, and stars, and galaxies was at one point compressed down to the size of a marble. And now has produced something called laughter from hydrogen. And that's amazing. So, you know, no chocolate milk for me, thank you. And we are gods and bugs and what we eat, contemplating the miracle of the rosemary bush and singing, and if the band you're in starts playing different tunes, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. Just remember, whether you're looking through a telescope or a microscope, it is infinite in all directions, and you and the person next to you are the precious nexus of being that can actually love that.